Next time when I come, I'll be able to listen to you sitting there as a spectator. Thank you very much.
Some of his time. I actually wanted to ask him, why is it that defense orders in India are so delayed? I'm told it took 15 years to place an order for helicopters and it was scam ridden. And Antony says he'll cancel it. 15 years to place an order for helicopters? I actually wanted to ask him, how does a union cabinet function? His talk on the core issue of defense actually gets me to a lecture that Chidambaram had given at a function when he had just relinquished being the Home Minister of India. It was on security. Chidambaram says that the core issue of security is growth. If we have growth, it gets us more import duty, more excise duty, more sales tax, more income tax, more funds in the treasury we can spend on defense. It was a nice statement. Somebody understands that money is needed to be spent. When he became the finance minister, he has gone to all the capitals of the world on a roadshow marketing India. He went to Hong Kong, he went to Davos, he went to Germany, he went to New York, he was in Singapore, all the time promising to the foreign investors, see what are we going to do for you. I thought he was playing to the gallery as far as rating agencies were concerned. He had made it a personal agenda that India should not be downgraded. But we still thought that what he's calling economic reforms, which I thought was crisis management, will probably get something in the budget. To take forward what Mr. Prabhu said, what was the scene before the budget? We have an all-time record current account deficit. Our imports are more than the exports. Never in the history of India were they so, the exports so less. In fact, the deficit is being managed because of almost $75 billion of expatriate remittances into India. If our workers were not sending us money, we would be bankrupt on the external account front today. Growth has come down to an all-time low of almost 5%. The government does not want to admit it, but now they want to say we are going towards that Hindu growth rate of 3.5%. I wonder who mismanaged it. Inflation doesn't get tamed. Fiscal deficit remains high because the government only wants to get into spending, which does not get us anything. So we thought the budget would have something. The fact is the budget has got nothing. Maybe here is a finance minister and a prime minister who have lost control of governance, which is what we have all been complaining. We have Sandeep with us. I spent some time before we assembled here. It's nice to have a young, accomplished journalist among us. He is a Bombay boy, now settled in Delhi, a loss to us. 40 years old, deputy editor of India Today. He writes on security-related issues. He has written a chapter in Hussain Zaidi's book, Black Friday, which was to do with the 1993 riots in Bombay. He is also writing a book at the moment on the terror attack that took place in Bombay, which really put us all in shame. Sandeep, let me ask you to take charge and your main topic for today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Advocate Shri Desai and dignitaries in the dais, thank you for being here this evening. The topic is, as you can see, is slash in the defense budget, national security at stake. The facts are well known. On 28th of February, as we heard, the finance minister presented the annual budget where he actually said he increased the budget by 2,000 crore and 5%. But what he didn't tell you is that the numbers are actually falling because Indian defense spending has declined both in dollar and GDP terms. It's 1.79% of the GDP. It's down from 1.9%. It's the lowest ever allocation for the defense budget as a percentage of the GDP in 3 decades, since 1987. And these are the two gentlemen who must be most happy to hear of this. This is what the world defense spending looks like, there you have the US, which spends an astounding $700 billion, and you have the rest of the countries. The US spends as much as the rest of the 14 countries put together. And we are there somewhere at 2% because these are World Bank statistics. They include pensions and expenditure on other arms of internal security, which we don't look at. That shows you how the defense budget is actually shrinking as a percentage of the GDP from 3% right down to 1.9%. I'll just start a little about the story of the relation that the defense budget has with national security. We start with 1947-48 when that incidentally is what VVIP choppers looked like in the 40s. The Prime Minister was approached by the Army Chief, then General Sir Robert Lockhart, and he presented him a paper outlining a plan for the growth of the Indian Army, where he said, Prime Minister, we need to grow the Army to 200,000, 300,000. And Nehru's reply was interesting because it actually gave you an idea of what the mindset of the Indian political leadership was with regards to the armed forces. Nehru said, and I quote, "We don't need a defense plan. Our policy is non-violence. We foresee no military threats. You can scrap the army. The police are good enough to meet our security needs." So the Prime Minister didn't waste much time because in September he directed the army's strength be brought down to 2.8 lakh soldiers, 250,000 soldiers from 2.8 lakh soldiers. And our first budget in 1950 set aside 150 crore for the armed forces. And this is interesting. In 1950-51, this is when the Chinese threat had begun to loom large on the horizon. Right? China had started aggressively making claims on parts of territory that India had claimed as her own. And so the paradox is that you have a country the size of Western Europe with unresolved boundaries of over 3,000 kilometers in the north and the northeast, but with an army the size of present-day Bangladesh, right? The 150,000 soldiers. And then you have, in 1962, you have a decade. So from 1950 to 1960, you have a decade of relative calm. You have the Indian Army going abroad on UN peacekeeping missions, and Nehru realizes his dream of being a global statesman. And you have these occasional police actions, which is where the Indian armed forces go into Goa, evict them of intruders, of the Portuguese. And that must have kind of lulled the establishment into this sense of security that we really don't need the armed forces. Why increase the budget? Why give them what they're asking for? And in 62, he tells the armed forces, go throw the Chinese out. I've given them orders to throw the Chinese out. The armed forces try, and this is what happens. This is an actual shot of Indian prisoners of war from a Chinese propaganda video. And it's a devastating blow because it reduces our Prime Minister's global ambitions. It makes us realize that you cannot speak softly and carry no stick. Your threats have to be matched with military power. So what happens after 1962, this terrible war of the border where the Indian forces are humiliated, is that the Indian military starts reorganizing itself, the defense budget increases, the armed forces start doubling in number, and in 1965 you have Pakistan, which realizes that this Indian economy is growing, the military is expanding, and this is probably their last chance to settle the Kashmir dispute by force. So Field Marshal Ayub launches Operation Gibraltar, clashes with Lal Bahadur Shastri, who he grossly underestimates, and the result is a stalemate. And in 1965 it continues, it goes on to 1971, where the Indian budget is almost double of what it was in the 60s, and the Indian military machine is in full swing. And it allows Mrs. Gandhi to plan a war at a time and place of her choosing. And the theater is Bangladesh. The directives, the political directives to the army, to the armed forces are very clear. A resolute action is required, and it results in this, where we create a new nation, Bangladesh. So when the armed forces have the political direction, they are adequately equipped. They are given 9 months by the Prime Minister. They go on this thing of reorganization and rearmament. They're given time, and they deliver results. So then from the 70s, the Indian military machine picks up steam, and it comes to, you're looking at the late 80s, where the Hindu rate of growth, which you mentioned, is delivers us some sort of a semblance of superpowerdom. That's a cover from 1989. This is towards the last years of the Rajiv Gandhi government. But reality catches up, because in 1991, not very long after, you have gold being pledged, that the country is bankrupt and it has to actually pledge its gold. And a theory takes root that perhaps we don't need our armed forces. This is after 60. It's very interesting. After the 50s, you have this theory again that maybe we don't need the armed forces. We don't need to spend as much. We don't need to prepare them for combat. We don't need to prepare them to look after our security needs. And this decade, which goes on from 1991 to 1998 or 99, is referred to as the lost decade, where the armed forces do not get their armaments. They are actually neglected. The warships, their aircraft, their tanks, they lack critical spare parts. We are unable to fight another war, and this is not lost on India's enemies. So this is 98 Pokhran, the nuclear tests. And not long after, we have the army chief who's forced to say, we will have to fight with whatever we have. That's General Malik. That's interestingly, it's a Bofors gun in action in Kargil. Not very long after, it was caught up in a scandal. And it's interesting to hear what the Pakistanis have to, their assessment of the Indian military machine. You have here the great General Musharraf saying, in a briefing in July 1999, he tells the Pakistani political establishment, the Indians were in no position to launch an all-out offensive on land, sea, or air. This is interesting. He has been studying the Indian military machine, and he figures that this is the best time to strike. When the Indian armed forces are at their all-time low, they're just emerging out of the lost decade. So we strike now, we can capture Kashmir, or at the very least, Kargil and Siachen. The Kargil war, the Kargil conflict, actually gives us a taste of Indian resoluteness, because to quote another example from what General Musharraf's own General Shahid Aziz, a former ISI official, he wrote this very recently in the Pakistani media. It created a flutter. He said that General Musharraf said that no serious response would come from India. And he quotes, but it did, wave after wave, supported by massive air-bursting artillery and repeated air attacks. It cut off and forsake our posts. Our posts started collapsing one after the other. So the Kargil war actually proves the resoluteness of the Indian military to fight whatever it has. But it also gives us something, which is the Kargil Review Committee report. This is probably only the second time in 60 years that the Indian military has actually seriously analyzed itself and, its failings, its problems. The first one, of course, was the Henderson-Brooks report, which has still not been declassified after over 50 years. This is the second report. It's a public report. It's available on the media, on the web. I suggest you read it because it gives you a comprehensive view of what Mr. Prabhu was talking about, the assessment of our national security. Nothing much has changed simply because we haven't learned from these lessons of over a decade back. The key recommendations of this report have not yet been implemented, which is basically the creation of a Chief of Defense Staff who will oversee all the three armed forces. That key reform is still yet to be implemented after nearly 12 years. So to continue from Kargil, you have Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha who gives defense priority again, 28% hike in the budget of 2000. And the budgets have been increasing ever since, to give credit to the governments. Ever since it's been riding, the economy has been picking up, and the military budgets have been going at roughly an average of 10%, though it has declined of late. But ever since then, it's been 10%. And you would think that the Indian Armed Forces, after a decade, would look something else. But this is the present state. The IAF, the Indian Air Force, is down to less than 32 operational squadrons, which is the strength of the 1965 war. It is what it was 40 years back. The Navy has less than a dozen operational submarines. The infantry, which is your fighting arm, the boots on the ground, they don't have modern boots. They don't have helmets. They don't have assault rifles. The army is still flying helicopters that were designed in the 1950s. I mean, every other day, these are the crashes that you don't hear. These are the Cheetah helicopters that actually ferry supplies to Siachen. They're the critical, they maintain a critical air bridge. Those have still not been bought for many, many years now. And in short, the Indian Armed Forces are not ready for war. Why did this happen? I mean, where did all that money go? If it was just budget spends and money being spent, why is it that after 50 years after the China war, we are unable to deter China, we are unable to dominate Pakistan, the armed forces are still short of equipment, we are not ready for war? This is what our infantryman looks like. I mean, I've been to the J&K Valley in 1996. I went there recently in January, and I found the only item of equipment that the armed forces person has in 20 years is the cell phone. There's been no other incremental addition. There's no night vision devices. They don't have proper boots, no helmets, no modern lightweight bulletproof jackets. So I want to go back to the problem. What is the origin of the problem? I want to start at the top. I mean, that is the symbol of our republic, the 4 Ashokan lions. They're magnificent, but